I'd like to introduce Anthony Grilli from Focus Laboratories, who's going to talk today about contract lab readiness. Tony has over 30 years experience in contract laboratory management and hosted hundreds of customer and regulatory audits. So this experience will help inform attendees today how to look under the hood of a laboratory during a visit, not just punch a checklist. Tony has a graduate degree in microbiology from the University of Medicine and Dentistry of New Jersey and has led laboratory groups for SGS and Celsus. He is the owner and laboratory director for Focus Laboratories, a full-service microbiology laboratory in Bethlehem, Pennsylvania, and Atlas Analytical, a sterile drug microbiology and chemistry lab in Tampa, Florida. So with that, I will introduce Tony.
Thank you, Laura. So make sure you can hear me in the back. Am I loud enough, Glenn?
Too loud.
Too loud? I'm going to be too loud and too fast. I talk quickly. This is a topic that probably most of you are already somewhat familiar with, so I'll gloss over the high-end stuff. How many people outsource to contract labs now? Okay, good proportion of you. So you've probably had some good experiences and bad experiences. I'm really proud to be part of this industry, part of this business. I've been in contract labs for, I don't know, Chris Newston, you and I go back to that long time ago.
We're not talking about it.
Too long ago. And there was a time it didn't really have such a good reputation, I think, because I'd come to these meetings all proud and be like, I work for XYZ contract lab, and I wasn't with Merck or J&J. It felt a little, secondary, but they've grown so much because of all the outsourcing, and they've really, I think, upped the game quite a bit, and very proud to be part of that. So my intent here is to give some reasons why you would want to outsource, some things what you should look for, and some risks in contract testing. And then, as Laura said, some of the things under the hood that you might not think about to look for. All right, so these are just my opinions, not PDA's opinions. So, in summary, as has already been said by both Catherine and Kelly, your success is obviously dependent upon the success of the person or the company that you're outsourcing to. We're going to talk about that. We're going to talk about why you might want to outsource QC testing. How do you pre-qualify a laboratory? There's a lot of us out there. What you should look for during the audit, the importance of defining expectations up front, and then how to conduct ongoing monitoring. Something that we talked about again at the end of Kelly's talk there. And then some examples of when things go wrong, and they do. So why use a contract lab? Managing an internal QC lab can dilute from your own focus. If your company is primarily drug discovery and innovation, to have a whole nother laboratory internally that's got to do GMP testing and maybe both microbiology and chemistry includes all this different instrumentation. It's a whole lot of work that's going to take some of the focus away from your day-to-day R&D mission. Or there may be specialty equipment that you just don't want to invest in at this time, right? It might be some NMR work you need to do for reference standard, secondary reference standard. You're not going to buy an NMR for 2 or 3 tests. You're going to outsource that to a contract testing laboratory. Contract testing labs work in volumes that reach economies of scale that you may not get to. So maybe you have a small clean room, you do some environmental monitoring. For you to buy the Petri plates and the sampler and the particle counter may not make sense when you have another laboratory that's doing environmental monitoring on a scale that can drive that cost way down. We also have a broad range of experience. We test for many different companies, many different types of products. We may have experience that you don't have yet as you're getting into a new product line. You may have already seen that particular product. You can help advise on that. There's a tribal knowledge that goes with this that's outside of SOP sometimes that you may want to learn from before you get into testing it yourself at your site. So what is the risk? Obviously, the biggest risk is the loss of control, right? You're handing your baby over to somebody else. It's really nice to be able to go down the hall and say, hey, what's up with that test? It's not going to be ready till Tuesday, as opposed to calling a lab and them not getting back to you. 2 weeks go by and you're wondering what's going on. You're hoping the test is going to be compliant. Where do you belong in the hierarchy of customers? We've all got, as a contract laboratory, tens or hundreds of customers. Where do you fit in there? We'll all say, well, you're the most important one, but are you really, and how do you know that, and how's that managed? There's a loss of transparency. You don't really know what's happening. Again, they're not down the hall. You know, do they have the capacity? Are they going to maintain that capacity? Are things changing? We talked a little bit about change control and quality agreements. The laboratory is hundreds of miles away. Is it the same subject matter expert? Has management changed? Have the procedures changed? 2017 on the FDA website, there's a really interesting link. You can pull it up here. It's in the printouts that lists and summarizes the 483 observations by year and by industry. And I went and downloaded them and took a look at the summaries. Over 3,483 observations, about 70% of them involve laboratory problems in one way or another. So, you know, we don't need to be convinced that laboratories are important and that the quality of the laboratory is important. But 70% in some way or another could have involved the laboratory, including scientifically sound laboratory controls, mentioned 124 times, faulty test and release for distribution 64 times, incomplete lab records, again, data integrity 39 times in 2017 on the 483s, and then faulty microtesting 27 times. So it's critical. You're handing it over. You want to make sure it's going to get done right. How do you know that it's done right? Part of the solution, in my opinion, is to establish from the very beginning that the laboratory is an appropriate fit, right? Once you do that, verify that it's in a state of control and has systems in place to retain control. Ongoing lines of communication. So we talked about that a little bit with supply chain. Things change. How do you keep that communication going? And at the end of the day, it's really a relationship. Right? So you can't just outsource it and hope everything's fine. You got to go back and have that trust. Just to go back a little bit on the cost side, this slide's out of order, I apologize, but you know, when you're shopping for the laboratory, obviously economies of scale can drive prices down. We talked about environmental monitoring and how buying bulks of plate can save money for you folks, you know, if we go out and do it ourselves. There's greater efficiency. Anybody who's in the lab business knows that more than half of the lab time is really in setup. If you're running one sample and you're spending all that time setting up, then you got to break it down to another sample. Or if it's a contract lab that runs 10 different batches of microcrystalline cellulose from 10 different manufacturers, you know, they have that efficiency, which can be passed along in the cost. The margins in a contract lab are built on that sweat equity. We don't have a patented product that's bringing in revenue. All the revenue is coming in from the labor, and the labor is our highest cost. So that forces a drive towards efficiency that helps drive the cost down when done properly. I think you said, Kelly, sometimes the compliance is done at the cost of productivity. That can be, and that's part of the verification process. But the lab has many of the same costs you do too. So we have to pay for labor, right? As I said, it's our largest cost, supplies, equipment, and we have all those other, you know, back office costs, IT. Have to keep getting rid of these legacy systems that we've been, you know, kind of investing secondhand in. HR, we have HR issues, believe it or not. Admin, you know, waste, getting rid of all the plates and chemical waste. It's all part of our cost. So that's part of your, should be part of your assessment when you're looking at labs and you're looking at costs. Some are incredibly expensive, some are incredibly cheap, and you probably scratch your head wondering why. A lot of that is proportionate to productivity and what they're actually doing. All right, so what to look for in a laboratory? It's sort of like online dating, right? Like the first thing you do, you go to the websites and you're looking, and there's all these wonderful places with these great pictures with these happy people, white lab coats, perfect hair, multicolored solutions and test tubes. It's so annoying, isn't it? You watch like CSI or something, they always got the red, blue, yellow test tubes. Like, what is that? It's nothing. But it's like, I guess, when you're doing this online dating, where everybody put their perfect pictures up, and you don't really know what they are. So you get some information from this stuff. You get some information from their website and from the internet and from the trade journals. But you have to verify the stats. So obviously, make sure that they're an FDA registered study. That sounds obvious, But, from some of the discussion this morning, it isn't always the case. Asking for a copy of the debarment letter. If they say, what's that, move along. Are they ISO? This isn't necessarily a deal killer, but if a laboratory is ISO, it also gives an extra level of assurance, not just GMP, but that they're looking at other areas of lab management that are verifiable. And it's another third party that's come in and looked at that and said that, yeah, you know what, they actually do have a calibration system. They actually do have a CAPA system. Ask them to email you some quality information ahead of the visit. You're going to go audit. You don't want to spend a lot of time learning about the company. Have them give you the SOP list, equipment list, maybe CVs of particular SMEs that are of interest to you. Location's important. And of course, somebody mentioned this morning already, check the internet for 483s or warning letters. Referrals. Always the best, I think, source. So, you can go online dating and pick the prettiest picture, or you can have your buddy go, you know what, I have this friend who's really nice, and you should check them out, they're trustworthy. That goes a long way. Okay, so before you go, you're going to have a pre-audit survey. There's some pretty obvious questions, SOPs, equipment, which we already talked about. What about culture and customer service? It might be interesting to know, are they a private company or are they a public company? I've worked for both, and there's plus and minuses for each. If it's a public company, are they owned by like a BlackRock or something like that? That might be really, pushing hard to get back the investment in the business that they put into. If it's a private company, maybe the person's taking more out than they're putting in, but it just kind of helps to paint the picture. Will they share revenue information? Obviously, for a public company, you can get this usually from their annual report. Private companies not likely to do that. But this is all important to understand the question of capacity. How much can they really get out? And that's what it comes down to with contract labs. Just what you said, Kelly. When does that equation push too far for sacrificing compliance to get the capacity out? Do they keep metrics on turnaround time, investigations, out of specs? Do they have business continuity plans? If it's a single site and a hurricane comes and wipes that site out, what are you going to do? Did all your method transfers, validations, developments, archives, all that stuff's in that site's gone. You got to start over. Does the total number of staff really reflect the business? An org chart. They may not want to put the names on the org chart. I don't. I understand that. I don't want you guys stealing my guys. But have a number. How many people are in the chemistry lab? How many in the micro lab? So now it's your first day. You did all your homework. You're going to go out and see what this is about. Bring with you a chaperone, a technical expert, somebody who actually knows what it is that you're outsourcing. I've had a lot of audits where it's a quality person, and they go and they check, and we've got all the documentation, we have the SOPs, and we have the training, and we have the equipment, but they don't know what the equipment's used for. And they don't really know what the person in the laboratory on your side is looking for. So it's very helpful to bring a chemist or a microbiologist with you. Send an agenda ahead of time and stick to it. And this is something that I sometimes try to get around, and I've seen it happen. We'll have the audit, have the sales team come in, give a sales presentation, start at 9. Oh look, at 10 o'clock. Do you want some more coffee? 10:30. Well, I really want to see the lab. Okay, let's go. Boom, 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 through the lab real quick, come back. Want to have lunch? Nice 2-hour lunch. They're getting tired, turn the heat up in the audit room. I've seen labs, and I've been party to labs that try to stretch the audit experience out where there's very little actual observation. You want to spend as much time in the laboratory as possible. You can look at paper, you can have a nice lunch, you can have a sales presentation, but it's in the lab that it happens, and that's where you really want to maximize the time. So ask for extended time in the lab. Everyone's going to be on their best behavior. Oh, we got a big audit today, make sure you have a clean lab coat. Everything's dusted up and clean, we look good. If it isn't, then first date over, right? I mean, if you walk in and people are already defensive and you're asking questions and they're like, not cooperating very much, that's, in my opinion, a deal killer right there. Okay, so you're in the facility, you're looking around. How is sample management configured? That's the first step. Of course, you're going to walk the walk. What does your sample do as it goes through the laboratory? Your sample's mixed in with hundreds of other samples. Hopefully they're protecting your confidentiality, they're protecting your confidentiality. You can't see what those samples are, but you have a sense that there's good segregation, so there's no mix-up. They're comparing your chain of custody, right, your sample submission form to the information on the label. There's a nice, neat process for doing that. Is it a logically laid out facility? Does the sample go through without a whole lot of spaghetti diagramming or with people walking in and out of different rooms to get what they need done? Is it a logical flow? Is it a big open ballroom lab or more of a closed, tiny lab? There's advantages and disadvantages to both, and it depends what you're looking to do. If you're outsourcing microbiology testing and you want to have, a separate confined area for preservative challenge work, ID work where you got bugs out in the open, have that separate from, your microbial limits or cleanliness type of work, that makes sense. You want that separated. Same time, I've worked at labs that were legacy labs that had grown. They owned the building, so they couldn't grow out, so they kept growing in, until it looked like a maze with all these little tiny labs getting sectioned off. And for a chemistry lab, that's not always the best thing. You got rooms now where people are working, they're not supervised, you don't know what's happening, they're coming in and out of doors. So, there's advantages to both, but think about how it applies to what you're trying to do. Are there enough hoods? This is part of the capacity issue. They're doing $12 million a year business and they have 2 hoods. How's that work? Is there room in the facility for scientists to write up data? I always found this interesting. I worked for a lab one time and they were designing a new lab. It's this big, beautiful room they're all happy about for the data write-up. It's like, yeah, all the analysts would come in here and write up their data. And I'm like, did you ever hear about COA? C contemporaneous, I don't understand how they're doing that. How do they do it here and write it up there? There must be a lot of running back and forth. So, that helps you just understand a little bit the culture of the place when you're in there. Is there rational separation of materials? Equipment, okay, obvious stuff. Is it in good shape? Right? Does it look clean? Always notice, like, Agilent, the 1200 units, CPLCs are white, and then they kind of go gray, and then they kind of go like darker in color as they get older. See what color the instruments are. Obviously, are there stickers on it? Do you have records for it? Is it appropriate for the task? So this is another example where you want to bring your technical person to the visit. Just a random example, maybe you're running endotoxin, LAL test, and you've got a very chromogenic type of product, and they're showing you a chromogenic kinetic system that it's just not going to work, but your QA person's going, well, it's calibrated, and it's archived, everything is good on it, it's working, but it won't work. Do they buy new equipment? Take a look at the age of the equipment. Is it appropriate? Part 11 compliant? Is it proportionate to the work volume? So again, it's a $12 million business and they have one autoclave. How does that work? How does that happen? Check out the use logs. This is always a very good way to determine whether or not the laboratory actually has experience in what they're talking about. A good contract testing laboratory will not put client information in the use logs. It'll be a sample number and what was tested for. So they shouldn't push back when you say, can I take a look at your use log for this HPLC? If it's dusty and hasn't been opened since 2017, 2016, probably not experts in that area. If it's got a lot of work in there, more than you could possibly do in an 8-hour shift, and they're not a 2-shift operation, it's another question. But it just gives you an idea of what's happening in the laboratory. Supplies, just like you folks were talking about supply chain, Catherine, we have supplies too. How do we verify them? How do we qualify them? If there was a recall on a particular product, and this happens, all of a sudden BD calls and says, oh, you know what, that batch of McConkey Iger's no good, sorry. How do we go back and let you guys know? How do we find out what's our traceability for that? Take a look at the glassware. Again, it's like you're going into someone's house. It's a little bit intrusive, but if they really want to partner with you, you're going to show them the kitchen, and you're going to bring them, something to eat. And if The glassware's chipped, it's not the right grade, it's old, it's inappropriate. You've got to wonder what else is not right. It's obviously, it seems like a simple one. USP standards, I've gone to a lot of lab audits. Can I see your standards? They're not USB. Can I see your standardization program? Well, you know, we did like a comparison study on one. Make sure they're USB or equivalent, or that they're actually very well standardized. SOPs, are they complete? Are they instructive? Where are they? This is my own pet peeve with my lab too. You know, we'll have procedures, spend so much time writing these things. And they're beautiful, they're 12 pages, and all the signatures are on them, and they go in these little sheet protector glassine envelopes, they go in a binder, and the binder goes up on a shelf, and that's it, you know, until the audit comes and they come down and you look at them. We really require, take that down and open it up and run it with the test. Especially obviously protocols, test methods, and things like that. They should be dug, they should be stained. I want to see Jim Graham stained fingerprints on them. You know, it should be like they're actually. Are there typos? You know, that's a little tell. Maybe they're rushing around, they don't have time to really get it right. One or two you can forget, but if it's an endemic thing, you might have a problem. Are they reviewed on time? We all kind of get stung by this, right? You have a 2-year SOP review time. Are you keeping to it? What's your system to keep to it? If you're not, something's just not right. Okay, the most important part, we can talk all we want about the equipment, and the facilities, and the procedures, and the process with people. Right? Labs are people. It's a people business. It's the people that are actually doing the work. I don't care how many UPLCs you got. If the people don't know how to run them or archive them properly, not much use. Is there cross-training? Is there only that one person that runs the antibiotic because they know how to do it, because they get the right result all the time? That's a tell. You know, why are they the only one running this test? What happens when they're not here? Is there retraining? You know, okay, so you've been doing this preservative challenge for the last 20 years. Did you know that it changed 2 years ago? You might want to take a look at it again and retrain to it. Meetings like this are very useful, and we've been talking on the board a little bit of frustration we can't get some younger involvement in. It'd be great to have some newbies in the industry to attend these meetings, because it's a great example of retraining that you get from outside your own organization. Does the contract lab do that? What is the supervisor to tech ratio? You know, sometimes you have a lab with all these impressive PhDs in the offices or marketing guys, and then in the lab, it's flat, and there may be some benefit to flat organizations, but I don't think so in a lab. I really don't. I heard an interesting piece on NPR recently about successful hockey teams and soccer teams and baseball teams. The ones that are really successful aren't because of the big superstar hitter. It's you know, the defensive guy who's kind of running the whole team as a captain. You know, catchers are always good managers for baseball teams. It's the person in the lab who's actually seeing what's happening on a day-to-day basis that can guide these younger folks, these new hires, along the way. What is that ratio? What's the turnover rate? Now, this is a perennial, you know, challenge for anybody in the contract lab industry. I referred a few slides back about our profit margins. You know, they're really based on our sweat equity. We don't have a product. So we get these kids out of school, and you know, they don't teach GMP in college. They don't even teach ram staining, it seems like. These kids know FLR1, restriction enzymes, and all kinds of gene jockeying, but they can't do a plate count, you know? Minus one, what does that mean? So we take them in, you know, we kind of give them like a paid internship, and, you know, we train them on this stuff. That's kind of our role in the contract lab world, I think. And we try to make them happy, but you guys, with your 401ks and incredible health benefits and tuition reimbursement and make it hard for us to keep them. But we do, you know, I mean, I have staff now that have been there for years and years. But it's important to look at what you're looking at a lab. You know, is a turnover rate 2 years, 3 years? I think it takes about a year for somebody to really, because GMP is not training, right? It's a way of life. I mean, they have to do it. I don't care how many times I tell them, don't write on the plate. You know, it's when you glue the plate to their lab notebook because it's original data that it starts to sink in. It takes a long time to get that way of thinking. So look at that for laboratories, that's important. Talk to the people on the floor when you're going through the audit, you know? Have a little conversation, see what they know that they don't know. If they're defensive and they're scared and they don't want to talk to you, it kind of sounds like a very top-heavy management style that may not be very transparent. Are they clear on what they're doing? Do they really understand it? Are they happy? That sounds like a silly thing, but I've managed enough laboratories, and I've managed enough laboratories with different divisions, where I go to visit the happy one, and I visit the sad one, and the happy one's revenue and compliance was like this. And you can sense it. I don't know what it is. You go into a laboratory, you can sense it right away. This is just a weird place where people aren't happy. And if you're not happy, you're not going to give it your all. I don't think that's a KPI, and I don't know how to monitor that. I don't have that number scale, but it's important. Okay, quality agreements. We talked about this today. There's a guidance on quality agreements, defines responsibilities for different parties. Matrix, contact list, qualifications, out of specs, it defines all these things, right? And they're all very, very important. And we get hundreds of these. It's like, Pfizer has 4 different divisions, and each one's giving us a quality agreement, and we're signing them, and we're signing them. And, this company wants archiving for 5 years, and that one wants 7, and they want 3, and they want 10, and they want us to keep it forever. And ours is 5. And so, 5 years are up, and we're getting ready to trash everything. It's like, oh, wait a minute. Who's 3? who wants it back? Ask your lab how they manage that. It's easy to sign this stuff, and it's easy to have this stuff, and to your point earlier about, is it a legal document? Well, it's what you're telling your customer you're going to do. How are you going to do that, right? So we've had different tables and things that make it for quick, easy access to get that done. Okay, so you picked them out on the internet, and your buddy said they were good, and you went, asked some questions, you went to their house, you saw how it was, you had your first date, everything was fine, I think it's a go. But maybe you want to send a first sample. And I wanted to address your other question too about, when do you stop checking? I think at the end of the day, you're outsourcing for a reason. You're outsourcing because you don't have the capacity or desire to do it. If you're going to test and check everything that they're checking, then there's no point in outsourcing it, right? So it comes back to this relationship. When do you feel comfortable? It's a non-tangible thing, but when have they demonstrated their worthiness? And I think the best way to find that out, and preferably even before the audit, is send them something. And if you do it before the audit, then you have something to look at, You can look at their systems during the audit, but unless you've given them something to work on, you can't look at how they really keep the data for you. Ask for the raw data, confirm that it was done properly. Was it delivered on time? Do you like the report format? Different labs have different report formats, may not necessarily work for you. And then there's service agreements, right? You talk about master service agreements and things that are outside of the quality agreement that can tell you a lot about a contract testing laboratory. Are they going to commit to cost increases? How they go over time? No? Turnaround time commitments, communication plan. Is there going to be a project manager? So a lot of this is about communication. How are we going to communicate with you? You're going to have a single customer service person that will be dedicated to you to give you updates. Are we automated? Can you just go online and see the status of your sample? And then things go wrong. They inevitably will, right? Nothing's perfect. Something's going to fail. Something's going to deviate. Something's going to non-conform. And out-of-spec investigations are actually, I like them. Because it's an opportunity to kind of dive into the lab and really see what's going on. Nobody does an in-spec investigation. I know we do internal audits, but those really aren't like this. This is like, now everybody's freaking out. We got to turn over every rock and figure out what's going on. How do they do their out-of-spec investigation? It's just a checklist. Calculation's good, method's good, analyst trained. Not my fault. Can they perform investigative testing to help reveal a root cause that may not be immediately obvious? Are they scientists? Are they thinking? Right? The lab has the knowledge of the test. The sponsor has the knowledge of the process of the product. They really have to work together. So from my experience, the out-of-spec moment is really when you test that relationship to see whether it'll last or not. I had a situation very recently where we failed a sterility test, which is always terrifying, you know, a sterility failure. And we did our investigation, we did the EMs, they were all clean, the fingertips were clean, settling plates were clean, disinfectant was properly made, you know, it did everything it possibly could. Could not find an assignable cause. But you know what the sponsor said. It's your fault. It's always the lab's fault. And I wish it was, right? It would be so great if you could just say it was the lab's fault. That's the easiest thing to do. I made a mistake, it wasn't you don't have to recall this product. We couldn't find a reason. So we said, come on over. You know what? Help us with this investigation. Come over and take a look at what we're doing. Maybe together we can figure this out. And sure enough, you know, they pointed out a few things that we really weren't doing optimally. Sterility testing is a lot of first air and a lot of technique, and there were some things that maybe we could have done better, but I did not see as an assignable cause. I was like, listen, you know, we've tested 600 different products over the last, I don't know, 5 months. Not a single one failed. Yours failed twice. That's kind of weird, don't you think? So we just did some investigative testing and retesting, and they said, yeah, it is weird, and they figured it out. But, you know, that's the kind of partnership you want, I think, in a laboratory. Somebody that won't just, because I've seen a lot of labs that do the checklist done, and then you're left scratching your head, and what some sponsors might do is just go to another lab and get another result. That's not something we should do. So if there is an assignable cause, do they get a very good kappa? You know, they get to the root cause. And if you get a chance to look at their trending, is it analyst error, analyst error, analyst error, you know, lack of training, lack of training, lack of training. You know, at some point that lack of training is a reflection on the lab, that they're not training right. More often than not, in my experience, it's a reflection on the analyst who just doesn't give to whatever's and needs to go. So you have to watch, you know, some of these root causes in these labs. Okay, deviations, non-conformities. So they notify you when you deviate procedures while running your samples. That'll be in your quality agreement. Hopefully you'll have something there that says, if you're not going to run this test exactly as I say, you gotta let me know. I have to approve it. What do they consider a major deviation and a minor one? You know, do they understand when requalification, revalidation has to occur? Is there a kappa when it's a unplanned deviation? Quality metrics could be, should be part of an ongoing communication program. What's the turnaround time? It's so funny, you know, we could be 99.99% on time for a customer, but that one time we're late, that's all I know, that's all I remember. And I understand it, but it works two ways. So by us keeping these metrics, we can go back and say, I'm really sorry, but we were on time 99.9% of the time. So your lab should have these metrics, they're helpful to have. How many out of specs, we talked about this morning, I think, generated overall versus number of samples. Don't really care whose fault it was, want to know how many you had, and then how many was your fault, would be a good subcategory. Number of samples is a funny metric, that's why I keep coming back to financials, you know, because that, you know, one $50,000 method stability indicating validation study is a sample possibly or project, and then an EM plate is a sample possibly. So you have to watch how those are managed. It's best to somehow take a look at it financially, because the financial is a direct reflection on the labor involved. How many deviations did you have? And again, the turnover rate is good to have reported on a monthly basis if possible. Change controls, you know, what's new? New equipment, new management, new people, new SMEs, what's happening, new capabilities. That communication can happen in a variety of ways. Yeah?
On your question, Tony, on the OOSs, how many OOSs are required? Question. I use some contract laboratories. I use them for development work, experimental work, and we don't know if it's going to work. And we use laboratories for routine QC analysis. It may be the same analytical method. So I'm always concerned about potentially generating OOSs on experimental samples that go into the regular metric reporting system, because the first time I walk in as an auditor and says, I'd like to see your list of OOS events. If I'm an FDA investigator, I would expect that to be the first question. Is there any special way we should be looking at managing development samples where versus the OOS on commercial product using approved methods?
Well, if I understand it right, you have a sample that's not been validated for a particular test method, right? Because it's developmental, you're just trying to...
Or we're looking at alternative processing equipment or maybe a development batch.
Right, so it's, I mean, out of spec is when a product that's for release tests out of spec and shouldn't be out in the market. If you're still in developmental phase, I wouldn't consider that necessarily out of spec.
Okay. Is there any way you would identify it in your metrics as to being developmental versus routine QC?
My labs have always primarily been GMP QC labs. That's kind of what I'm talking to. But I have worked in labs that I've had separate, and it gets tricky, right? I've had separate login systems that identify it as R&D, you know, and then you have to confirm it's R&D. Just like I've worked in other labs that have been GMP, non-GMP, right? You might be a GMP lab that you're also doing cosmetic testing. You're like, well, I don't consider this GMP, so I don't have to do a GMP. You know, my has always been, we'll do everything to GMP, which comes back to your problem with the out of specs. But in a case like that, I mean, if you logged it in as an out of spec, you clearly say, method not validated, it's R&D work done. You know, it really doesn't apply.
Because they're always very good about coming back to me with this, and we talk it over, make sure all the procedures are done. And then I decide whether, at least we discuss whether further investigations needed, or whether or not, please issue the result. It's probably a valid result.
Right, well.
But I don't want to make it look like we're either doing bad things or the laboratory is doing bad things, because we're not.
Yeah.
We're just learning.
Right, it's development.
Thank you.
Okay. So just some 483s of examples of when things have gone bad. There's one here about potency analysis. Sample calculations not described within analytical worksheets, so it just kind of came up with the potency somehow without documenting calculations. Firm does not have the actual numerical value of lab measurements performed in drug product analysis. Again, the documentation problems. Data acquisition we talked about. More documentation problems. When you're letting go of this, and there's a reason to let go because they're better at it and it can be done more effectively, and they're impartial, that's all great reasons to outsource. But you have to be sure they have the sufficient sophistication to protect you. There may be things that you don't know that they should know, right? And so this goes back to, I think Catherine and Kelly both said, who's responsible when something goes wrong? I've been in many lab audits and have many problems when, you know, the agency will come in and previous management maybe didn't validate something. And why didn't you validate it? Well, the customer didn't want to validate it. Well, too bad, you know, that doesn't work. So we're liable, you're liable, everybody's liable. We all know by now it's 2018, methods have to be validated. Make sure your lab protects you in those ways too. Yeah.
What is your feeling if you go to a lab audit and they don't want to share, like you're qualifying a lab, and they don't want to share a 483 with you that they may have received? In fact, they'll tell you, well, you can look up. Like, do you feel that they should be forthcoming and share it all, or do we have to just go and figure it out?
Right, so that's a great question. I hope you can see here, there's obvious things you need to have, there's tangibles, and then there's intangibles. It goes back to that relationship thing. Yeah, they should give it to you. You know, they want to work with you. It's no secret, right?
It's a new business, and they'll say to you, well, we haven't done anything for you, so this doesn't apply.
Then they don't want to do anything with you, in my opinion. You know? I've heard lots of different stories, customers charging for out-of-spec investigations, charging for audits, contract labs, I mean, charging for this stuff. And no, I mean, it's part of the business. You know, what's to hide? You're going to get it anyway. I'd rather you look at it with me in front of you so I can explain it to you. You know, because sometimes they look worse than they really are too. So I don't understand that.
Yes, well, sometimes with respect to your comment, there's confidential implications to not sharing what's in the IR. So maybe sometimes you can further ask them to maybe enacted, kind of give you a sense of what that was about, but a lot of times their reluctance is based upon the confidentiality.
Right, you would obviously protect the confidentiality of any other customer that was listening there. Yeah?
I've gotten involved in a lot of these lab and facility type things, and what I always have struggled with is what you're asking about. Is there transparency? I mean, are you having an open relationship between the lab and the person using the lab? Because without that, you're going to run afoul of all kinds of things. The more things that someone tries to hide, whichever side it's on, the more trouble you're going to have working together.
Yeah, it's a precursor of what you got down the road, really, is what it looks like.
Tony, some of this is due diligence in advance. You can go on Freedom of Information Act, and if they don't want to give it to you, even before you select them, you do your homework before. You go and ask, and you might have to pay a little bit, but you can get the information from FDA, redacted for it, you can see if there's been any problems. You can look on their website and see where else are they doing testing for it. You might see, oh, they're claiming that they do work for Europe and Asia, and you can check with those other regulators. You can get the feedback. And then if you ask them and they don't want to give it to you, you've already got it. And I've walked into many places where I had the 483 in my hand and their warning letter, and I asked them about it. They denied it ever happened, and then I pulled it out of my bag. So,
Wow.
again, it goes to transparency and relationship. You might not want to deal with them. Because to the other gentleman's comment, they can redact it out, but if it happened in the U.S., you can get the information. If it happened abroad, you can contact the regulators, or they might even advertise on their website the logos of their customers. And then as a quality person, if they put Eli Lilly's logo up there, contact Eli Lilly's quality person and say, hey, are you using this lab? We're thinking about using them. What's your feedback? So if they're posting that on their website, use it to your advantage.
Yeah, you're going to find out, so there's no reason for them not to.
If they refuse, that would be costing me to say,
Exactly. There were also some 43s about, laboratories still not performing method suitability, on some sterility tests. And you look at these prices of these labs, and then you can kind of see why that is, right? You get what you pay for, I guess, is part of the lesson here, too. It's all part of the puzzle. So in conclusion, search for the right lab, commit to them. It's a partnership, trust, but verify constant communication. Thank you.